When you picture the end of the Second World War, your mind probably jumps straight to this exact moment: a sailor, a nurse, and an explosion of uncontainable relief right in the middle of Times Square. It's an energy that rippled across the Allied world. In London, a sea of faces packed Trafalgar Square, singing, cheering, and finally breathing after years living under the constant threat of the Blitz. We tend to look back at 1945 as a single collective sigh of relief, but treating the end of the conflict as a universal party ignores the grim reality on the ground. Across much of the globe, peace meant stepping out into a pulverized, unrecognizable landscape and trying to figure out how to survive the coming winter. To understand the polarized world that emerged after 1945, we have to look past the ticker tape. The starkly different experiences of the war fractured how the victorious nations actually celebrated its end. In the United States, the post-war celebration looked exactly like the movies. Because the fighting took place entirely overseas, American cities survived without a single bombed-out street or shattered factory. That physical distance from the front lines meant the home front was spared from localized grief. When the fighting finally stopped, the resulting emotion was intense, unadulterated excitement. They were waking up in a uniquely powerful position. 4 years of relentless mobilization had replaced the stagnant economy of the 1930s with a high-capacity industrial engine that outpaced the rest of the world combined. This chart shows the civilian death toll across different regions during the conflict. You can see the North American losses barely register on the graph, standing in stark contrast to the millions of lives lost across Europe and Asia. For these untouched nations, the victory parades acted as a massive kickoff party for decades of upcoming economic prosperity. But across the Atlantic Ocean, the overall mood shifted. In newly liberated territories like France, the cheering crowds on the Champs-Élysées were celebrating the physical reclamation of their own homeland. But that joy was heavily layered with chaos. In many cities, the official declarations of peace overlapped with active combat right in the streets. Emerging from years of hostile occupation meant there were deep internal wounds to address. True liberation required the immediate and often violent removal of neighbors who had collaborated with the enemy. This grim reality played out in public squares. Citizens accused of fraternizing with occupying soldiers were subjected to brutal public shaming and extrajudicial punishments. Once the dust settled, these nations had to confront the physical state of their country. They had won back a homeland structurally shattered by years of enemy control and relentless Allied bombing. For liberated Europe, the celebrations were exhausted and fractured. Victory meant the complex process of rebuilding a national identity from the rubble. Further east, the scale of the state-sponsored celebrations was staggering. Searchlights and fireworks illuminated the sky over the Kremlin, projecting an image of imperial triumph. Tracking Soviet population demographics, a massive central void appears, representing over 27 million lost citizens. Looking at these working-age male brackets, entire generations are gone. With every family missing fathers, sons, or brothers, state holidays became collective mourning. The state leveraged this exhausted relief to reinforce its own authority, staging highly orchestrated parades to physically showcase the destruction of their invaders. There was absolutely no unburdened joy here. For the USSR, victory was a bloody, traumatic survival that locked the nation into a permanent state of defensive paranoia. Zooming out to the epicenters of the conflict itself, we see landscapes where no amount of celebration could mask the total annihilation of society. Former world powers were hollowed out. This created what was known as Zero Hour, a massive global power vacuum waiting to be settled. The United States, having experienced an untouched and highly profitable war effort, channeled its confidence into decades of aggressive economic expansion. Conversely, the Soviet Union, scarred by the sheer scale of their losses, channeled their victory into the aggressive creation of physical buffer states across Eastern Europe. The specific way a nation experiences the arrival of peace serves as the psychological blueprint for how they will wage the next global conflict.